We're going to be taking a look at the different options you have for DPNs. We're going to be covering the materials of plastic and metal and wood as well. Let's just get plastic out of the way first. I 3D printed this one recently. It's PLA. You can see it's very flexible and it seems like a cute idea, but if we look a little closer, you can see those little lines. That's the printing lines that cause an extreme amount of friction, and it's garbage. Next we have wood. Wood has a fair amount of friction. It's also quite flexible. As you can see, it bends. That's not really an issue. You shouldn't worry about that, but it is more fragile than metal, bearing that in mind. It's also the cheapest option. You can see this also has some grain to it. That's what's causing the friction, but it's not unbearable. New knitters may actually find it helpful, although it may quickly become more of a hindrance than a help. Let's do a quick eBay search for double pointed needles to illustrate how cheap the wooden ones are. So let's sort by lowest first, and we can see they start at 74 cents. Hard to beat that. That being said, let's move on to my favorite material, metal. It is the least flexible, which also means it's the most resilient. It offers the least amount of friction, which enables you to knit the fastest. This needle I've had for about 5 years. It's German made, and it costs about 60 crowns, $7 for 5 of them. To put that in perspective, I can get all these needles from China for the same price. Either you get one set of Addies, or you can get all of these for the same price. But I only really care about the 3.5s, the UK number 9s. Let's have a closer look at those. So these are both rated to be the same gauge. The German ones are 8 inches, whereas the Chinese ones are 10 inches. You can also see, looking at the tip, that the tip of the Chinese is slightly longer. But if we look closer at the tip, you can see that on the German needle, the transition from point to gauge is very smooth, whereas the Chinese one has a slight ridge right there. That's not a huge problem or an obstacle, but I'm going to show you how to fix that regardless. But first, let's check the gauge on both of these needles. So I'm going to zero out my caliper here, make sure it's exact, and I'm going to measure the German ones first. So this one should be exactly 3.5 millimeters. But if we check it, we'll find that, yeah, it's about 0.13 shy of its rated gauge, whereas the Chinese one is actually closer to the mark, strangely enough. But all things considered, if we just measure it with a standard needle gauge, little injection molded piece of plastic, find 3.5 there, and we stick the German one through, we'll find that there's very little play. That 0.13 millimeters will not really have an effect on your knitting. And we checked the Chinese ones as well, and they fit just about as snugly. I can't really tell a difference. They're number 4s. According to this, the UK number 9s are actually 3.75s. Man, it's a strange world. Whatever. So why are the Chinese ones cheaper? I was handling them earlier and I noticed they felt really light. These are the 5mm ones, number 6s, UK number 6s. I'm never going to use these needles, so I can just sacrifice them. So I was thinking I'd have to cut this open, but I'm pretty sure I could just snap it with my hand if I apply enough pressure. And yeah, they'll break right open and we can see that they're hollow. So that looks pretty bad. I can just break it with my hands. You might be thinking, there's no way I'm going to buy those needles. But bear in mind, I can probably just bend the Addies as well. Yeah, it's not really a problem to break needles if you want to. I could bend these back and forth a couple times and eventually get them to snap, or I could just, cut them open with the Dremel. So if I just fire this up halfway through, I can just snap them right off. So you can see that they're solid. So they're higher quality, obviously, but they cost 11 times more. So are they 11 times as good? I doubt it. So I've tuned up this one Chinese needle. I've fixed that little ridge at the end, and now I'm going to do the same with the rest of them. To do this job, I use the Dremel tool. It's not necessary, but if you do use it, wear eye protection. It's also possible to use a file. It takes a little bit longer, but it will certainly get the job done. But once again, if you don't have a file, you can also use sandpaper. And if you can't get sandpaper, you can always rub it like on a rock or something. Safety first. And let's begin. The key word here is going to be patience. Try not to take off too much at a time. Start gently removing some of the mass, starting from the ridge and moving down towards the needle point, all the while rotating the needle to preserve the original form. And also bear in mind that this needle is hollow, so especially when working the tip, don't go too crazy. You want your needles pointy but not sharp, or else you may hurt yourself later when you're working on your knitting projects. So once you are happy with the form, you just flip this bad boy over and do the other side just like the first. If working with a file, the principle is much the same. You start at the ridge and file down towards the point, all the while rotating the needle. This is going to take quite a while longer, but it gives you a lot more control so you won't accidentally destroy your needles. You can also work it the other way around, where you hold the file and rub the needle against it. This might be handy if working the tip. And if you're working with sandpaper, this principle applies as well. It's better to just lay the sandpaper down and rub and rotate the needle continuously. That's very important, so you don't flatten it out on one side. Just rub it and then rotate it, and try to work that ridge as much as possible. It might be beneficial to poke it forward like this. Don't stab yourself in the finger. Be very careful. You should probably not hold it the way I am. But once you're done and you're happy with the needle shape, you can also use sandpaper to kind of buff out the entirety of the needle, but don't go too crazy or you're going to alter the gauge. But this will make the needle a little bit slicker and the stitches will move more freely. Once you're content with the result, clean off any excess residue with soap and water and a bit of paper towel. And as you can see, those ridges have decreased significantly. They're still slightly visible, but to be honest, they weren't actually a problem. This is more for the peace of mind if they're kind of bothering you a little bit. But they're looking nice and Mad Max. I am pretty stoked about these needles, and yeah, they're definitely going to do the trick just as well as any fancy German engineered ones would. So in conclusion, my recommendations are: be sure to get double pointed and not single pointed. Make sure there are 5 needles in the pack and not just 4. They should be at least 8 inches long. I'm going to let that joke slide. Wood is fine. Metal's probably better. And just so it's said, I am aware that there are more options for material. I mean, there's a plethora of knitting corporations who just would love nothing more than for you to buy their whole array of knitting paraphernalia. So if you want to drop $100 on interchangeable freaking spaceship needles, that's none of my business. All jokes aside, I would be remiss if I did not at least mention the massive problem of illegal rosewood logging presently occurring globally. Brazilian rosewood was recently moved up to Appendix 1 of the endangered species list. And a report published by Global Eye in late 2016 shows that over 90% of Dalbergia and Pterocarpus populations showed unstable or declining populations and are in serious trouble. The logging practice has become increasingly violent. Families are driven from their home, their houses burned, and in some cases, those who dare resist are even assassinated. So, if someone finds themselves marveling at the unparalleled beauty of some rosewood needles, they might want to think about that.